So, are running shoes important? Well, that depends really on why, oh, sorry. So, are running shoes important? I mean, well, that depends. One way of looking at it is, if the running shoe is, if you're looking at buying running shoes, are you looking to like improve your performance, or are you looking to reduce injuries, or are you just looking for the right shoe? You know what I mean? Like, do you have other concerns like how much they cost or how they look and all that kind of stuff? So it's like, it really depends what you mean by important. So the most common reason I think people ask me this question is the thinking, I don't want to get the wrong shoe because I don't want it to cause an injury. And that's certainly the way it's phrased to me most of the time, because I'm a physio, right? So people tend to say, what running shoe should I buy? And I think where the head's going, and what, follow-up questions usually sort of lead there, that they're thinking, if I get the wrong shoe, I'm going to get injured. And, the question is that really is that a reasonable thing to think in light of the current evidence? And what I would say is, when I look at buying shoes, I personally am not that worried that my running shoe choice is going to make me get injured. I think there's much more important things to worry about if I'm worried about injury than what shoes I buy. And that's not to say that they're not important at all, but just that they sit pretty low on the sort of totem pole, or that's a bad analogy, but you know what I mean? They're pretty far down in terms of what's likely to give you an injury. Buying the wrong shoes is probably pretty low in my mind. A couple of things I do look for with running shoes is, if we're looking at, do you think they're going to cause an injury? Well, how different are they from your current running shoe, right? Because we know that the body adapts to the stresses placed on it. And if you buy a running shoe that is a certain way, let's say it's let's go extreme, right? So you've got a big difference between in the stack height, right? So the heel is much higher, the heel is much higher, not that much higher, than the toes. And there's a lot of cushioning, and there's a lot of support on the inside, so it's sort of a motion control type of shoe. It's stopping pronation. One sec. Beer tonight from Troubled Monk again. Pesky pig. So so it's as supportive as you can get, right? And you're saying, okay, if I buy these, what are the ones with the fingers? The vibram, the 5 fingers, right? So it's pretty much nothing. It's like a hard sock, right? So you're going from a very supportive, very cushioned shoe to pretty much just running in bare feet. And then you don't adjust your running volume or your running technique. That's a situation that is likely to lead to an injury. It's also kind of common sense, right? We would expect that with that big change. But if you're going from like a very supportive sort of motion control shoe, and you're going to move to more like a neutral shoe, and then you ask me, is that likely to cause an injury? I'd be like, probably not on its own. It could, but it's probably not going to. And equally, if you're moving from that sort of more neutral shoe that's still got cushioning, it's still got a little bit of support against pronation, and you're going to move to something that's more like a zero drop kind of shoe, but it's still got cushioning, it's just not got that sort of the drop from heel to toe, and it's not got as much support on the medial arch. And you say, well, will that cause me to get injured? It's like, well, probably not. And then equally going from that, like you're in a sort of flat shoe, and it's there's not much pronation control, there's a bit of cushioning, but there's no drop. and there's not much support generally, and you're going to go to something more like the 5 fingers that I just mentioned, well, that's probably not going to lead to an injury. Do you know what I mean? So if you move a little bit at a time and just make sure that your shoes aren't that much different from your last pair of shoes, you're quite unlikely really to get injured. The other thing I look for, so that's the first thing, is are you going to make a drastic change in the kind of shoe that you're wearing? And the other thing I look at is, are the shoes changing the way that you run? So if they change the way they run, they're going to change the way your sort of body interacts with the environment and the way it could potentially adapt to it. So that's going to change where the stresses go, which tissues are placed under load, and how much and how often, and that influences injury risks. So are the shoes going to change the way you run in a way that's going to put stress through tissues that is vastly different from how it has been previously? So let's take that example of the motion control to the Vibram 5 fingers again, right? So the motion control shoe, because of the cushioning and support, will allow you to land with a sort of firm heel strike with quite a lot of impact, right? And then you go into the 5 fingers, it's pretty much like taking your shoes off. And you'll notice a lot of people do that and they go for a mid or forefoot strike straight away. Now, immediately, they've almost doubled. I don't know if I could quantify that exactly, but if you imagine when you're running, you know, with a heel strike, right? So the heel comes down like this, and then you change that to a forefoot heel and then push off the forefoot again, right? So you've doubled the work on the calf because the calf wasn't doing much sort of pre-heel strike, and now the calf is kind of absorbing some of the impact. And we would say, you know, the research studies look at that and say, well, that's good. It like you're reducing impact forces. And it's like, well, how are you doing that? You're doing it by absorbing some of the impact with the calf muscle. And it's like, well, is that calf ready for that change? And how quickly is that change going to come, right? So that you could change the shoe in a sort of positive way, right? Because I often talk about impact forces, and if impact is too high, then it increases your injury risk, and that's a correlation that is true. But is it going to result in injury? You know, if you reduce the impact forces by overdoing it on an Achilles tendon that isn't ready for it, then yeah, maybe. So if it changes your running technique a lot, which is more likely if you're changing from a big change in shoe type, then that's more likely to lead to an injury as well. And then the other thing that they've looked at a bit in the research, and I'm not going to sort of dig into exact references and that kind of thing, but that's comfort. So there is a thought out there that I think there's only maybe 1 or 2 studies that have looked at this, that comfort is an extremely important thing to look at if you're talking about whether a shoe is going to work out well for somebody. I don't know that I buy that comfort paradigm quite so strictly. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to think about, you know, are these a comfortable shoe? I think that's kind of you got to start there. They've got to be somewhat comfortable, and that'll stop you changing too drastically between extremely supportive to completely minimalist or barefoot, right? So if it's reasonably comfortable, what that might be doing, what that evidence might be picking up on, is that they're not making big changes from one shoe type to another, and because big changes too quickly, that's an injury risk, right? So comfort is a decent place to start. So if the shoes are not a drastic change from one type of shoe to another, right? And you're not particularly changing the way you run a lot, which is less likely if they're not a drastic change from one type to another. And if they're reasonably comfortable, right? Then if we start with all of those things, the chances of your shoes getting you injured are very low. I'd say almost zero, right? Very, very low. So And that's the thing most people are worried about, right? So that's why I wanted to talk about that first. And if you have any follow-up questions to running shoes leading to injury and that kind of thing, just stick them in the comments, because I'd certainly like to talk about it. It's a super common question, is like, how, what running shoes should I buy? Or are my running shoes right? And it's like, well, most of the time, probably, yeah. Like if you go to the running room, I mean, it's hard to get a bad pair of shoes out of there. Do you know that they're all pretty good for most people? And most people are on a kind of bell curve, right? So they sit in the middle where most shoes are going to kind of be fine. And as long as you're not making drastic changes in your shoes from one shoe to the next, or one like pair of shoes to the next, then probably going to be all right. So performance. That might be a different thing now. This is it's already taken me 10 minutes to get to performance, right? This is all like when someone asks, are running shoes important? Or, what running shoes should I buy? Are my running shoes right? There's so many questions that you have to ask them to answer that well, that it's very difficult to give a short answer, right? So I'm trying to more give people things to think about, because then you can start from there. So when it comes to performance, I mean, certainly there's been a lot of fuss made recently, and it's super exciting, right? Like, because with the Nike Vaporfly coming out, and people just breaking records in them, and it looks like they do make a difference. It's exciting, right? Because there's not much equipment in running. Like if you look at triathlon and look at the bikes, like there's so much equipment that you can buy. It's so much fun. And I just got into that recently, but it's like running, like you got your shoes pretty much. That's your equipment. And like, I'm already saying it doesn't matter that much what type of shoe you buy, like as long as it's a reasonable shoe. When Nike come out and make a shoe that like seems to be helping people break records, that's exciting, right? So I get it, but when you're looking at performance, a lot of people, I think, if I get the right shoe, it's going to help me break my PR. For the people I work with most of the time, which are recreational runners, age groupers, people who want to beat their PRs, people who want to, move up from a 10 to a 21K. Like, the reality is and for me as well, like it's another thing where when I'm trying to think about how I'll perform in my next race, my shoes they're just not on the radar. I don't think that they're very important at all. As long as they're like reasonable. If I run in Wellington boots or, winter boots, right? That has a negative effect. But I think as long as your shoes are not having a drastically negative effect, which is, again, if you go to a running room or something like that, then you're not going to get really terrible shoes. So, yeah. The things that seem to be important when it comes to performance in shoes are the weight of the shoe. So light shoes seem to be important. And over the course of certainly a marathon, they do say, I think it's 1% per gram or something like that, like it'll improve your performance. So that is important. Like if you look at, I think that was right, maybe every 10 grams, I'm not sure. Then that is like significant. And it does seem that cushioning is important. People seem to run faster with a certain amount of cushioning. And it seems that the Nike Vaporfly has this like carbon plate in or something like that. It's like springy. The sort of heel to toe stiffness, the lengthwise stiffness seems to be important too. Yes, they will improve your performance a little bit, probably, maybe. Like, so even if it increased it like 5%, I mean, it's still in the ballpark where, a lot of runners are doing zero strength training. Of the runners who are doing strength training, only a small percentage of them are actually pushing weights that are challenging them and asking them to adapt. So doing better strength training would be a much more likely way, and it has much better evidence base for improving performance and making you more likely to beat your PR than a different pair of shoes. The other thing would be just training more, right? Just a lot of people, like including myself, just don't run enough. We could run more, and if you added more miles, then you'd probably do better, right? Like I'm not a coach, so I'm not sort of trying to present myself in that way, but there is a lot more, I think, to be gained by training more, by running more, than there is by spending more on better shoes or trying to pick the best shoes for you, or you know what I mean, or spending a lot of time worrying about the best type of shoes. I guess I'm coming out on, are running shoes important? I guess if I was going to answer the question, I'd probably say no. Not as, I guess a better answer would be not as important as we mostly think. Not as important as I used to think. I used to think they were very important. I don't think they're that important now. As long as they're of a caliber that is basically a decent running shoe from, a running store, then I don't think it makes a huge amount of difference to the people who I see all the time, which is the recreational athletes who are trying to beat their PRs. If they want to beat their PRs, or they just want to keep training and stay healthy, then running shoes is not something that should be sort of top of mind. It should be just get some decent shoes when your shoes wear out, basically. Yeah, I mean, I've put in the comments some other things about ways we could improve performance that are more likely to work than changing running shoes, but excuse me, I don't want to dwell on that. I'd say yes, running shoes can help you improve your performance. No, they probably can't help you avoid injury. Changing your running shoe drastically between one type and another quickly, that might increase your injury risk, and I think it's reasonable to presume that it would increase your injury risk. And if you're wanting to improve performance, there's better ways to do it. And if you're spending a lot of time worrying about running shoes when you're not strength training, when you're not working with a coach, when you're not doing a significant amount of running volume, when you're not doing training that is hitting all the different intensity zones, if you're not doing those, like just 4 things, and you're worrying about running shoes, then you're probably worrying about the wrong thing. Yeah, that I guess a running shoe is important. Probably not as important as we think most of the time for most people, right? Anyway, if you have any comments or questions you'd like me to answer, just please stick them in the comments, because I'm going to try and answer common questions in videos like this, or at least just give my thoughts on it. And yeah, if anybody has any that's like running injury related particularly, then I'd certainly be happy to answer it, and I'll do some more of these videos. Anyway, I will sign off for tonight, and I'll see you again next week.